Well, I think for some of us to wake up, we need a wake-up call. And in 1986, I got the call. I was in a triathlon in Palm Springs, California. I was on the biking portion of the race. I was making a turn, and there was a police officer on the corner. He was pointing at me and telling me to make this turn. And there were two cyclists on the corner, and I swung around the cyclists and passed them. The problem was the police officer had his back to the oncoming traffic. So when I passed the cyclist and I made the turn, this four-wheel drive vehicle going about 55 miles an hour catapulted me out of my bike, and I wound up breaking 6 vertebrae in my spine. And the compression from the force of hitting the ground compressed the vertebrae. They're called compression fractures. And when you compress volume like that of material, it's got to go somewhere. So it went back on my spinal cord. And because of the way that I landed and that I flexed forward very hard, the top vertebrae, T8, thoracic number 8, compressed more than 60%, and the arch that the spinal cord passes through broke like a pretzel. So I had multiple compression fractures. I had bone fragments on the cord, and I had the neural arch of T8 broken. So the typical protocol for that is what's called Harrington rod surgery, where they do a full laminectomy. They cut off all the back parts of your vertebrae. In my case, base of my neck to the base of my spine, screw in these stainless steel rods. The action of screwing the rods into the vertebrae could cantilever the spine off the cord and make some room. But if it doesn't work, you still have the same condition. And so they told me if I didn't have the surgery, I'd probably never walk again. And so I had 4 opinions from 4 leading surgeons in Southern California. Scripps Hospital, 2 were from Scripps, and 2 were from JFK in Palm Springs.
Yeah, it's my hometown, Scripps, yeah.
So I decided against the surgery, and I just thought, hell, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not doing anything. I'm laying face down. And there's an intelligence that lives within each and every one of us that's giving us life. And that intelligence is consciousness. And consciousness is awareness, and awareness is paying attention. So I reasoned maybe it was paying attention to me. So I thought, I better start paying attention to it. So I said, let me see if I could connect with it. If I could connect with it and give it a plan, a template, a design. And when I was happy with that design and I was completely present, I would surrender my creation to this greater mind, because I certainly couldn't do the healing, but it knew how to heal. Anyway, 6.5 weeks of absolute hell. I couldn't get my mind to do what I wanted it to do. I'd start reconstructing my vertebrae in my mind, and then the next thing I know, I'd start thinking about, am I going to live in a wheelchair? Should I sell my home? Should I sell my practice? And I became aware that I kept focusing on what I didn't want to have happen instead of what I do want to have happen. So I realized that when you're under stress or some type of trauma, that the hormones of stress cause us to always focus on the worst case scenario. That's what survival's about. So after 6.5 weeks, I started getting on top of it. And it took me about 3 hours every day in those first 6.5 weeks to go through it, and I was never satisfied. But about 6.5 weeks, I felt like I hit a tennis ball right in the sweet spot. I went through the whole thing. I never lost my focus, because if I lost my focus, I would have to start all over again, because it wasn't clear. Yeah, when I went through that process, Brian, and I made it through, something clicked, and all of a sudden, it got easier. And my body started to respond to my mind. I mean, quickly. Pain levels dropped, my neurological condition changed, felt like I had more energy. What took me 3 or 4 hours to do, I was doing in 45 minutes, and all of a sudden, my body started healing. So I was back on my feet in 10.5 weeks. I was back in my life at 12 weeks. I was training again at 12 weeks. And
what did doctors say about this?
Well, the doctors were absolutely clear that I would never walk again, and they were absolutely clear that I had a head injury, that I was not fit to make those decisions. In 1986, you just didn't do that back then.
And what caused you to even think of this? I mean, what was Joe like back then? I mean, were you open-minded to different ideas?
I think I was somewhat open-minded. I was more of a philosopher. I love the principles, but this is an initiation.
This is putting it all on the line.
This is, and I figured, look, if I'm gonna be in a wheelchair possibly, at least I gave it my best shot, you know. And so they told me that if I didn't have the surgery, they'd have to put me in a body cast for 6 months to a year. So when I went back to see one of the doctors who was the medical director at Scripps Hospital in San Diego, he was blown away and was so happy for me. He was the one that was giving me the hardest time, and he just couldn't believe it. So during that time, I just made a deal with myself that if I was ever able to walk again, I'd spend the rest of my life studying the mind-body connection and mind over matter, and I've been doing that since 1986. I call somebody up on the stage that was diagnosed with breast cancer, colon cancer, diagnosed with esophageal cancer. I can go down the list, and they stand on the stage and they tell their story. And it's not that they look like a movie star, sports figure. They're not all buff, they're not all young, they're not all beautiful. Just a common person. You hear the story, how they did. You hear about their past, you realize what initiated the disease, and then you...
Emotional trauma, maybe.
Emotional trauma, one trauma, or two traumas, and then how they had to overcome the emotions from their past. Now think about this. The latest research in epigenetics says that it's the environment that signals the gene. Genes are like Christmas tree lights, they're turning on and off all the time. Genes make proteins, and proteins are responsible for the structure and function of your body. The expression of proteins is the expression of life. But if you're interpreting your environment the same way every single day, you're thinking the same thoughts, demonstrating the same behaviors, living by the same emotions, you keep the same genes on and the other genes off. Throw in the hormones of stress, which really downregulates genes to create disease. Then the question is, if the environment signals the gene, and the end product of an experience in your environment is called an emotion, if you live by the same emotions every single day, your body's believing it's in the same past environmental experience over and over again, and now you're headed for a genetic destiny. So then, can you signal the gene ahead of the environment? And the answer is absolutely yes. Because when you begin to embrace an elevated emotion and you combine it with a clear intention, and you're totally in the present moment, your brain and body don't know the difference between what's going on out there and what's going on in here. Your body believes it's in some experience in the external environment that's producing that emotion. And all of a sudden, the stronger the emotion you feel from an inward process, the more you pay attention to the thought or the image in your mind, you're creating a long-term memory. And all of a sudden now, you begin to downregulate the gene for disease and you begin to upregulate the gene for health. And that gene begins to make a new protein, and that protein begins to make a new hormone or a new chemical or an expression of something, new chemical that is going to begin to affect other systems in the body. So,
and that's what happens on stage. There's a lot of energy in the room.
No, that's what happens when a person finally breaks through.
Right, and that can happen.
That could happen in our event, but it could be a person who it took them 2 years to do it.
Right.
But the evidence suggests that acute conditions, our medicine is so great for acute conditions. You break your arm, you have appendicitis, you're not going to go to an acupuncturist. You're going to get immediate care. Chronic conditions require a lifestyle change, which means you have to start making different choices. You got to start examining the way you live your life and the choices you make and the thoughts you think and how you manage your emotions. And so the beauty behind all of this is that just like an infection spreads amongst the community and creates disease, once people start breaking through and they wrap their mind around this, health and wellness can be as infectious as disease, and we're seeing it happen. This is a time in history where it's not enough to know. This is a time in history to know how. So people that do the work that are in our community that have healed themselves of cancer, diabetes, of rheumatoid arthritis, from lupus, from rare genetic disorders, from Hashimoto's syndrome, from eczema, all kinds of health conditions. At the beginning of their journey, when the doctors did not approve of the choices they were making, and were making some type of prophecy that they were going to die within a certain amount of time, when those people showed up in the doctor's office, and it happened several times, and the doctor said, "What did you do?" and the and the patient explains it and, comes down to, I epigenetically signaled new genes in new ways. Every day I change my state of being. I memorize the emotions from the past and recondition my body to the emotions of the future. It was hard, but I'm happy that I did it. And all the doctors, now are saying, I wish all my patients were like you. It's a huge change because evidence speaks louder than any voice. And I'm very evidence-based. And so we have this new normal taking place, this consciousness that's beginning to awaken, that's beginning to impress the morphic field. Every time somebody does that, that's an experience that winds up in the field that people can have access to. And I think that there's a quickening happening in the world. And because of that, more and more people that are taking the chance to step outside of convention that were once considered foolhardy and insane, because once they pull it off, they're a genius or a mystic or a saint. There's more support for people to do that. And so every time somebody pierces this veil, it gives people permission to do the same.